Number 10 is Citizen Kane from 1941. Now, at this point in time, I'm not sure if people younger than me really remember Orson Welles very well. He was a big name when I was younger, right? Orson Welles, he did more than just sell wine. Orson Welles, he started the Mercury Theater back in the radio era in the 30s, 40s, and they did a dramatization, like you would hear radio dramas all the time. They did a dramatization of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds. The book about Martians coming to invade Earth. Well, most people had at least heard of War of the Worlds, if not read it or knew the storyline. So it was relatively common knowledge. Yeah, maybe not everybody knew it, but it was big in popular culture. So your average person should have had some foggy idea of what War of the Worlds was about, or at least enough people to bring some sense to this. Well, when they did this broadcast, they did it with all these sound effects and Foley and everything, and even though they started each segment after a commercial segment saying, "This is a dramatization," people went berserk, and they thought we were being invaded by Mars, because they're hearing this. I mean, they presented it as if it was a real news report. "We interrupt this broadcast to bring us important news from Grover's Mill, New Jersey. Martian invasion has begun in Grover's Mill." And Americans are listening to this and they're going, "Oh my gosh, we're all gonna die!" And in fact, if I remember right, people went out and they actually shot up the water tower in Grover's Mill because they thought it was a UFO. It was late at night. They went out and they shot up their own water tower, I think. But either way, there was this, just people fleeing for the hills. I don't know if there were suicides, but it created this ridiculous mass panic over something that anybody should have figured out wasn't even real. Because hey, you know what? The story that they're telling us sounds just like H.G. Wells' very famous and popular book right now. Or maybe the part at the beginning of each segment after a commercial that said, "This is merely a dramatization." Maybe that would tip you off that it wasn't real. So what happened was, War of the Worlds was an accidental mass hysteria. But the people who want to use mass hysteria to control other people, they weren't laughing. They were sitting back and going, and taking notes. And it developed quite a bit from there. But in terms of entertainment, Orson Welles became very famous from that. Now, his intent wasn't to scare the crap out of everybody. He's just doing a radio drama, but he didn't realize how stupid people were. So he didn't expect people to have that response. Well, he was given a contract by Hollywood that was the best contract ever given in Hollywood. He basically had free reign to do anything he wants. He could do anything, for what it's worth. Great. So here's this young prodigy coming up. He was very young at the time, and I'm pretty sure it was the first thing he did was Citizen Kane, a film. Now the film was rather dark. It was a drama, and it was a kind of a psychological drama. People at the time recognized that it was at least loosely based on the life of William Randolph Hearst, who founded, the Hearst newspapers. So Hearst was one of the people who was one of the first to look at his role as a newspaperman as being the potential to manipulate and dominate and control huge masses of people. Whereas previous people like Ben Franklin and people who had published back then, they saw it as a means to inform people, because an informed free people are safe and prosperous. They're informed, so they know what to do. They're not told so many lies that they will go out and do monumentally stupid things, pointless, counterproductive things, because they're well informed and they understand. So Citizen Kane wasn't about William Randolph Hearst, but it drew on him enough where everyone kind of knew this is based on him. You remember Citizen Kane? That's the one that was the rosebud, that kind of thing. Well, and one of the things William Randolph Hearst had done reportedly, if not demonstrated, the Spanish-American War, right? So there was this conflict started up between America and Spain, who had Cuba at the time, and basically the Caribbean, and they thought maybe we were going to go to war. So they start, the newspapers are like, oh my gosh, we're going to go to war, that kind of fear-mongering thing. And then it petered out and it didn't happen. Not going to war. Well, as the story goes, William Randolph Hearst, he talked to his photographer who was in Cuba and said, well, what's going on? When's the war starting? And he said, well, there's not going to be a war. And Hearst reportedly said, well, you give me the photos and I'll give you the war. So, in other words, you take the right photos, I'll put them in my papers, I'll start the war for you. I'll stir it up. And that's exactly what happened. So he went out there and he basically lied. You see, because when you're dealing with broadcast media, one person broadcasting to many, and all those people can't challenge what you're saying in real time to evaluate it, then the only thing the masses have to go by is what the person next to them is doing, or thinking, or believing, or what they think this person is believing. Well, everyone, if people are running around in fear and terror, if all they're doing is living their lives by fear, they're going to walk around real timid, and they're not going to be scared to say what they really think. They might say, well, someone like me back then would have stood up and said, what they're putting in Hearst newspaper is a bunch of baloney. That's a bunch of lies. But your average person doesn't want any conflict. They don't want to start any fights. So they'll just kind of sit back and, what do you think about that story in the Hearst newspaper? And they'll just say something lame like, I sure hope that's not true. Or something like that. When they know it's a lie. They know it's a lie. Hitler took this to another extreme and called it the big lie, but Hearst did the same thing. And they started the Spanish-American War. That's where we got Puerto Rico and the Philippines and Guantanamo Bay and things like that. All right? Well, that's kind of the key with Citizen Kane, is noting that a newspaper man like that, someone who runs a mass media empire like a Ted Turner did in the 1980s, and like only a few corporations run today, and if you know who runs them, you kind of understand who controls the world today, and certainly who's pulling the strings in this country. Why is it that in the 2020 election, all the news media outlets said exactly the same thing, often verbatim, literally the same script, even though one called itself ABC, and they called themselves CNN, and they called themselves, CSNBC, and yet they're reading the exact same words. If you had an infinite number of monkeys in a room with typewriters, they're not going to come up with the same words. But somehow all these different mass media outlets came up with the exact same words about what a rotten, underhanded, racist puppet of Russia that Trump is, and et cetera, all the way into the ridiculous narrative about the coronavirus, which became a coronavirus health scare because of that. You furnish me the photos, I'll furnish you the war. You furnish me the statistics, I'll furnish you the health scare. You furnish me the body count, I'll furnish you the running counter on the TV. Doesn't matter if it's true. Doesn't have to be true. Who's going to challenge it? How are you going to challenge it? If they're all the same news media, they're all reading the exact same words on every channel, literally the same words, how are you going to challenge it? I hate to tell you this, folks, but the possibility exists. The possibility exists without further investigation. I'm not saying this is true because I don't believe it is, but the possibility, based on the evidence, the amount of proof that we have, that not one person has ever died of coronavirus. The possibility is there. I don't think that's what happened at all, but that's how bad the proof and the evidence has been. We should have instead proof, absolute undeniable proof, that this number of million of people have died of coronavirus across the world. But the thing is, nobody's even seeking proof. They're not trying to get it. They're not trying to furnish it. They're just furnishing a body count. They're furnishing a narrative. And the mass media is taking it wherever they want to go. Citizen Kane was essentially about the mindset of somebody who would do that. And what do you know? he wasn't a very good person. You know, I've said it before, but someone in my situation, I'm not going to get many dates. I'm not going to be getting married anytime soon, right? This isn't going to happen. But my biggest fear is I would meet some really nice girl in a place where we don't have to cover up our smiles so we can't even see each other. And we would get talking and it'd be really nice. And then I say, well, what do you do for a living? She's like, I'm a journalist. And out of sheer self-preservation, I would have no option but to just back away slowly, get in my car, and drive. Because journalism has sunk so low, and the people, even at the bottom of the journalist cesspool, are so brainwashed into that cult that they don't even realize the damage they're doing to their own children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. That's how bad it is. Citizen Kane is a simplified explanation of that kind of thing. And that's why it's worth watching. Number 11 is Conspiracy Theory from 1997 with Mel Gibson and Patrick Stewart. Now, I don't know if you've seen this film before. I bet, maybe half of you have seen it and half of you haven't, roughly something like that. Well, I don't want to give too much away. It's a fun film either way, but let's just say the main character is someone who believes and seems to be able to come up with a lot of conspiracy theories, okay? In the cartoonish sense. But it's kind of like they say, just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean that people are not following me. You see, one doesn't have anything to do with the other logically. Therefore, it is possible to be paranoid and to be followed and stalked and possibly on your way to being murdered. It is possible. They don't have anything to do with each other. This is logic, something they don't teach in at least Minnesota schools. But you got to understand, if you're a bully in grade school, like kindergarten, first grade, if you're the beginning of a bully there, what are you going to do? You're a jerk. You've got cooties. I mean, that's the kind of level of stupidity you're going to use to abuse and put down this other person while you try to build yourself up by being a bully. All right? As you get older, it gets slightly more sophisticated, but not much better. You start using, dirty words and things to describe, well, you're a so-and-so in high school. Calling people names. You're still just a dumb bully, useless, but your language has gone beyond cooties at least. When you're still a stupid bully like that and you get into the professional world of business or government or journalism or something, and you want to bully someone else, one of the terms they use just like that is conspiracy theorist. And this word was designed for that very purpose. It was concocted deliberately to be something to attack other people. And the thing is, it's totally independent of whether the person they're throwing this word at is right or wrong. So you can use the word conspiracy theorist with a nut job who believes that aliens are building a nuclear weapon inside the engine compartment of my car. I'm not good at coming up with these fantasies, but you know what I mean. I mean, you can be some whack job who comes up with the loony stuff, and you can call them a conspiracy theorist. But then there's another person who's been out there researching a very real conspiracy, such as, something like where a conspiracy to commit high treason against the United States of America by overthrowing a duly elected president of the United States by using election fraud in many different parts of the country simultaneously. The kind of thing that should send probably a couple of thousand people to prison and at least a dozen or so of them to the gallows, which is what the law prescribes for high treason. So not vigilante justice, but this is what the law says. Those leaders of that should be hanged by the neck until they're dead. That's what the law says is supposed to happen to them. You see, that's what prevents other people from doing it in the future. But you have to have a real justice system. Well, if you have somebody who's researching the reality of that particular conspiracy, and what they're telling you is actually the truth, and it's what happened in the real world, if you're just a mindless, dumb, idiot bully, you can also call them a conspiracy theorist. You see? So you can take the tinfoil hat UFO whack job who lives in Fantasyland and did way too much acid, as if there's no such, any acid is too much acid, frankly, but you can be some total whack job, and this bully can call you a conspiracy theorist. But the word's originating from a bully. The word doesn't describe anything. It's just it's like cooties. It's like jerk. It's like those dirty terms used in high school. It's a label that's meant to insult the other person. If someone calls me a conspiracy theorist, you would have to know what it is I'm doing and what I've done and what I talk about and what I say and how I justify it and what evidence I have. You would have to know all these things to know whether or not that label really describes me. But you don't have it. All you have is somebody calling me a conspiracy theorist. So you don't know until you get to know me whether I'm this loopy, loony UFO in my trunk thing, or I'm somebody who has done serious research and is building a legal case that in a legitimate legal system would lead to many of our leaders in this nation being hanged by the neck until they're dead, as prescribed by our law. You don't know. You see, if the word conspiracy theorist just has that impact on you, you're not thinking. You may not be the bully who's using this label, which is essentially the adult version of cooties. It's no different than a kindergartner saying, you have cooties. You can stand up in Congress and say, you are a conspiracy theorist. It's the same thing. It's the same level of intelligence that's spitting out this insult. Conspiracy theorist doesn't have any meaning. The reason is because it has been abused. The word has not been used consistently with people who have or propagate theories of conspiracies. It's been used for just basically anybody you don't like. So the word has no meaning. It doesn't mean anything anymore. It's like the word racist. Racist used to mean that you feel that your race is superior to another race inherently, and the other race is inherently inferior, and consequences follow from that belief system. That's what racism used to be. Now racism just means some idiot called you racist, even though you're not in any way, shape, or form believe that you're superior. You see, they're destroying the language. Well, then that's the reason I would like you to watch Conspiracy Theory, because it's just a fun film, and there's nothing in there. I mean, this isn't about real world conspiracies, so it's not meant to make a point about some real conspiracy out there. But I will point out there are a lot of people sitting in prison right now because they were convicted of conspiracy. You see, there's laws against conspiracy, because what a conspiracy is when two or more people get together and conspire. And the reason that's a bad thing is because if you're one person robbing a bank, there's a good chance you're not going to get away with it. Okay, the guard might be able to tackle you or shoot you, or maybe a brave customer will tackle you on your way out. But if you come in with 2 or 3 or 4 people to rob the bank, and you've only got 3 tellers and 1 guard and maybe 2 customers, now you have one heck of a chance of getting away with it because you've pooled your resources. It's the same thing a corporation does. It pools a bunch of people's resources into one place, and that gives the corporation power over an individual. And that's why Starbucks can take a mom and pop coffee shop and erase it, destroy it, annihilate it into particles of dust. That's why Walmart can take a family-owned hardware store that's been around for 100 years and kill it. Because Walmart has that much power. It's a conspiracy. It's more than one person conspiring together toward a common goal. And there's power in numbers. That's what makes a conspiracy so dangerous. In a free country where all men are created equal and we're supposed to have equal opportunity, you don't want 2 or more people getting together to conspire against what you're doing. You want to fight fairly against this person, and you want to fight fairly against this person, but not both of them together. When they get together, they suddenly have all the power. And if you get, say, a couple thousand of them together, like happened in the 2020 election, look at the power they have, including the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who refused to hear the single most important case in American history, because he already knew what the answer was. You see, if your people and your conspiracy are at that level of government, if they're infiltrating all levels of government, we got a problem, folks. Hence, the prescription of hanging by the neck until you're dead. You see, when the Nazis were taken down, what they did was they took the leaders at Nuremberg, they gave them a fair trial, they were convicted, and they hanged by the neck until they were dead. And here is what did not happen after that. Here's what did not happen. Circumstances in society did not change such that those people could once again get together and come back and build another Nazi party that took over Germany. Because they were dead, you see. That's why they hanged by the neck until they were dead. The problem is the people who perpetrated this crime last year are now in control of our government and our news media and our court system and pretty much everything else. So watch conspiracy theory and think about that. Just because you're paranoid does not mean they aren't following you. Number 12 is Das Boot from 1981. This is a long film. It's quite a long film. I think it's about 3 or 3.5 hours long. It's a film about the U-boat personnel during World War II. So the U-boats were the German submarines. They were the Navy. They were the ones who were decimating all the other navies out there, destroying shipping. The U-boats were king until the Americans and the British kind of figured out their coding system and knew how to find the U-boats. But before that, U-boats were king. They were winning the war for Hitler. This Das Boot is a very slow, serious drama of what it was like to be on one of those submarines at the time after the Americans had started figuring out how to locate the U-boats. So now they were no longer king. Now the hunter was becoming the hunted. And there's a couple good reasons to watch Das Boot. For one thing, it is brilliant filmmaking. I don't know of any other submarine film that does a better job of showing you what it's really like to be on a submarine. And you got to understand, if you're down there underwater, I mean, you have to come up once in a while, for ventilation and, to periscope to see what's up there. But if you're down underwater in a war situation, in a battle situation, you don't look out the porthole and see what's coming. You're just underwater, and there's a radio man there listening in, and they hear propellers, and if you're down there and you're trying to be quiet so that their radio doesn't hear you, and then all of a sudden you hear this bing, bing, and you know that is their radar pinging you so that they now know where you are. The amount of terror that you would feel down there underwater. And then you hear the depth charges come down, and there's nothing you can do. If you try to escape, they know where you are. You have to sit there and wait for those depth charges, and if they blow up, it's going to shake the ship, smash your head into the iron. Everything in there's built out of iron. You see what I mean? What these submariners went through was unbelievable. Humans weren't meant to go through this kind of stupidity. But this is what war gives us, and particularly Hitler's war. And these guys at this point in time in the story were not winning the battle. The tides had turned and they were becoming the hunted. And they were starting to finally ask themselves after all these years, Why are we going through this sheer terror and probably going to die and never see our beloved wives and children again? Why are we doing this just for this one moron with the silly mustache? Because we didn't take a loyalty oath to Germany. We took an oath of loyalty to the Fuhrer, to one man, Adolf Hitler. See, I didn't. When I was growing up, I took an oath of loyalty, a pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands. All of it. The Constitution, my fellow citizens. I took an oath to all of that. They didn't. They took an oath, hand in the air, hand on heart, to Adolf Hitler only. And that's why they're down there going through all that terror. Now that their sun has stopped shining and now that they're being hunted, they're getting a taste of what they've been doing to other people all along while they were out destroying other ships. But the difference is, the people who they were destroying before, they were trying to preserve the freedom for the world against Hitler. But these guys are just now figuring out, after all these years, they're figuring out the only reason we're here is for Hitler. Hitler's not putting himself in harm's way. He's not on this boat. He's sitting there off in his comfortable little mansion up in the mountains there, with all these Hildas wearing, beautiful skirts dancing around him. We're the ones sitting here, 1,000 feet below water waiting to get killed. And one good reason to watch this film is I want to impress that point upon you, and you have to watch the whole film to really get that point. It's a brilliantly made film. The way that, golly, I'm so sorry, I don't remember who made it. Was it Paul Verhoeven? I think it might have been Werner Herzog. I don't remember the filmmaker. I'm so sorry, I should. But if you watch the whole film, given how long it is and how intense it is, it just makes you just feel what they're feeling. And as it moves on, you get more and more aware of the fact that the only reason they're going through this is to serve a lunatic. Because now you see that it's a lunatic, because he's not winning anymore. He's starting to lose the war. Back when you were on top and he would give you decorations and you could walk around Germany going, oh, I'm on a U-boat, and everyone's like, oh, you're wonderful. You're on top of the world. Because you never bothered to think about what it was you were serving all that time. You were serving a lunatic from the beginning, but you never paid attention. Well, guess what people are doing today as they walk around serving lunacy? The time's going to come when this country sinks so far down because of what they themselves have contributed to. They're going to be in the situation of those submariners. And they're suddenly going to have to start looking at people like Nancy Pelosi. They're going to have to start looking at all these people who are talking down about Donald Trump. And they're going to have to start looking at Donald Trump. And they're going to have to start seeing reality for the first time ever. And they're going to go, oh my gosh. All those fires we set, all that looting we did, all that effort we took to make sure that Donald Trump could not win the election. And he was right the whole time. We were serving people, megalomaniacs who just want to take over everything, including my life and my children's lives and my grandchildren's. They want to enslave us. And I wasn't paying attention enough to know, but now it's too late to stop it. Those people are going to be in the same boat as these submariners were when they started to finally realize that Hitler was insane. And I don't think I need to say any more about that topic. Watch Das Boot and put it in its proper context anytime people are serving lunacy like that. They don't think they're serving lunacy. They think they're doing the right thing. Oh my gosh, global warming's going to kill us all. We're going to die in 12 years. They'll go extinct in 12 years. Okay, if you're not thinking clearly enough to realize how stupid that is at the time's going to come when you finally realize how stupid that was and how much you contributed to the propagation of that stupidity. The problem is, it's going to be too late then. And you have no one to blame but yourself. Because no matter how much of a master manipulator Hitler and Goebbels were, every German citizen had a responsibility to think for themselves. And they refused to do it. Just like so many Americans today refuse to think for themselves. They let the CDC think for them. They let Greta, this child with no scientific training, think for them about global warming. They let Governor Tim Walz think for them about whether it is better to let a natural disease run its course and take reasonable actions, or if we should create a civilization nightmare through all kinds of stupid ideas like stay-at-home orders and making sure that nobody can see another person smile for at least 1 year, and see how that goes for the species, a social species. All you had to do was think about it, folks, and you would have known. You don't realize the sinking ship you are on right now if you're one of those people who's contributed to this. You will benefit from watching Das Boot. Number 13 is a film that you probably have not heard of. It's called Defending Your Life. This is from 1991, I believe. 1991. Yeah. Now, this is an Albert Brooks film, and you may not know who Albert Brooks was. He did stuff more back when, I always associate him with Saturday Night Live, back when Saturday Night Live was reasonably funny, from the time it started for maybe 10 years or so. Albert Brooks, though himself, I personally don't like what he does. I think he's annoying. I think he's pretentious. When I see Albert Brooks, I just immediately think NPR or Prairie Home Companion, just some kind of pretentious stupidity where Yoko Ono, that kind of stuff, where the art is really bad, but there's this consensus that it's all modern and brilliant, and so everybody laughs at it anyway, even though it isn't funny, or you know what I mean. That's what I think of when I think of Albert Brooks. And his character in this film is one of the most detestable characters I've ever seen on film. I don't think he means it that way, but that's how detestable the whole thing is. I'm not an Albert Brooks fan, let me put it that way. And yet, I'm recommending that you watch this film of his called Defending Your Life. And it has Meryl Streep in it, which is another lid on the trash can for this movie. And yet, I'm still recommending it. Albert Brooks and Meryl Streep in one film. I mean, that's like that's like NPR with jet fuel and steroids all mixed together. Oh gosh. So again, it isn't necessarily a film I'm going to watch over and over and over again. I've watched it twice. And that's about all I can take. But another thing is that it actually kind of brings in reincarnation as part of the plot. So not to spoil it, but that's part of the plot. So again, they're not really doing very well in terms of being in touch with reality. Well, here's what they do right. Here's the reason I really think you should watch this film. The overall theme of the film is that if you live your life in fear, then you're already dead. If you go about your daily life and what you want to do with your life, because you don't know, all things being equal, you never know if this breath is the last one I will ever take. As a Christian, I believe God has already determined what your last breath will be. Who knows when it is? He does. We don't. But even if you don't believe that, the fact is, one of your breaths will be its last. If not this one, then maybe the next one. Or maybe the one after that. Or maybe the one 17 years from now. Don't know. But neither do you. So if you don't use the time you have in this world to the maximum that you can get out of this life and contribute to this life and this world and to the people you love, then what's your purpose? What are you here for? What's the purpose of your existence? And if the reason that you don't do those things and make the most out of life is because you're just running around scared and terrified. Oh my gosh, what will they think? What will those people, those random strangers over there think of me? What will my family think? Oh my gosh, the government, they might persecute me. If this is how you live your life, you're already dead. It's the point I've been trying to make since the beginning of the coronavirus health scare. There are people, do you understand something? There are many people who are just dying naturally every single day. This health scare has been going on for now more than a year, about 13, 14, 15 months, depending on your location. And yet, through it all, people have been dying. They die in car accidents, they die from cancer, they die from everything. Just like people always have died. Nothing to do with disease, or with that disease. People are dying all the time. There are people who have been sitting there wearing this stupid thing on their face for the last 12, 13, 14 months. They've been running around in fear. They go out and they get this toxic soup that hasn't even been tested yet, injected into their body, and they die. And the last year of their life was spent wearing this stupid thing, running around in fear, getting toxic soup injected into their bodies. That's how they spent the last year of their life. Folks, that person died a year ago. They ceased to exist as anything that matters in this world. Their life ceased to matter. Their life ceased to be alive a year ago when they started being terrified of this. And how long are they going to drag this on for? How much of your life are they going to steal from you? Deliberately. Because that's what they're doing. Defending your life, if nothing else, for as annoying of a film as it is, it has its moments. It has a few charming things in it. And it has I think it's, I'm sorry, I can't remember the name, but Rip. I don't think it's Rip Torn this time. I think it's the other Rip. I feel so bad. But, there's a couple characters that are well worthless that make up for the detestable character of the main character. But it's a film that is worth watching. It really is. And it does have some moments in there. But it's one of the best films I've seen for helping you, hopefully, appreciate that if you live in fear, you've already died. If you live your life worried about dying, you're already done. Game over. It's just stupid. It's just stupid. Why continue on? All right, let's see what we have next. Okay, number 14 is the movie Dick with Kirsten Dunst and Michelle Williams, who are charming in this film. 1999 for this film. Dick is about Watergate, the Watergate scandal, Richard Nixon. So the first thing I need to say is if you don't know what happened with Watergate, then this movie's going to make no sense to you, and it's not going to benefit you. So either know about Watergate before you watch Dick, or go out and learn about Watergate before you watch Dick. I'm just saying. It's going to help you a lot. When I was young, one of my first ongoing memories of, TV and media was endless coverage of, Vietnam and Watergate. The Watergate scandal was on TV all the time, like the impeachment of Trump kind of thing. Just all the time. You got sick of it. It's well documented what happened with Watergate, so we know who the major players are. We know what happened. We pretty much know why. It's pretty well established historical fact. Okay, so if you know what it is, you know what happened and who the people were. Now, what Dick does is it takes the people and what happened, and it gives a completely different explanation for everything. It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. In other words, kind of like, you remember it was 0 Hour is a drama about a plane in peril, and then Airplane is a comedy about a plane in peril. Their scripts are essentially identical, and yet they're completely different films. One's a comedy, one's a dark drama. Well, with Dick is like an extreme comedy explanation for what happened in Watergate. Nothing to do with reality, nothing to do with what actually did happen, but here's the trick. Everything in that film technically is possible. It could have gone that way. There's nothing supernatural here. They're not pulling angels out of the sky to make this or that happen. Everything in there could have happened. I mean, it didn't. I think any reasonable person would realize it didn't, but it could have. And here's the thing. Given that that does explain what happened at Watergate, plausibly, what if you're a child and you raised through the whole American school system and you're only told the dick version of what happened at Watergate and you're never told the truth of what really happened? Then when you become an adult, what are you going to believe happened in the Watergate scandal? Because there's nothing about the explanation you've been given your whole life that's unreasonable. I mean, it's stretching credulity, but it could happen. It could have been this way. I mean, there's nothing, physics, laws of mathematics, there's nothing that says it couldn't have been that way. So what's going to inspire you to challenge what really happened in Watergate? You've been told a lie your whole life, and it's perfectly plausible. That's the thing to think about when watching that film. It's a hilarious film, brilliantly done. But again, if you don't understand what happened in Watergate first, who the people were and what the events were, this isn't going to make the slightest bit of sense to you. You're not going to appreciate the humor or the power of creating a second narrative for the same story. This method of creating a narrative and drilling it into people through a media that they control to the point where the people don't even realize that everything they've been told is a complete lie, because it seems to be kind of sort of plausible. It seems to kind of sort of weave together consistently, for at least insofar as they paid any attention at all. The things they're told in school, like 2 + 2 = 5, and hey, little boy, you might be a little girl, and all the things that you're told growing up, and nobody's challenging it, and it sounds plausible on the surface, although the boy and girl thing doesn't even plausible. That's just bat guano crazy. But it's funny, if you look at they have a T-shirt out there that says there are more than 2 genders. Making their point. It's all like in rainbow colors and everything. And then you look over at the sizing chart where you buy it, and there's male and female. Those are your choices. There's more than 2 genders. You see the stupidity of that, right? Anyway, going back to Dick here. This is the power of people who have control over your life. If you run the school system, you can determine what that kid believes by the time they're 18 years old. And that kid might believe nothing but lies. They're already trying to paint incomprehensibly. They're trying to paint the magnificent economic recovery that happened under Trump due to his leadership. They're trying to paint it as if somehow that was a consequence of the devastation that Obama caused before Trump even got in there. The problem is, the things they're talking about are not lagging indicators. These are real-time indicators. So they're just blatantly lying. But you see, if you put out a narrative like that, and that's all people hear, as long as it sounds somewhat remotely plausible and they're not challenging it, they're not thinking, they're not taking responsibility for their own intellect and researching what they're told before they believe it, then why wouldn't they believe that? That's the reason Dick is such a great and useful film. I don't think that was actually the intent of the filmmakers. I think it was just meant to be a good, fun way to rewrite history, you might say, in a silly kind of way. Very entertaining film. But playing Richard Nixon was what's his name? Oh gosh, I can't remember. Let me look this up here. Dan Hedaya, yeah. He's the guy who played Nick Tortelli on Cheers. He's hunched over. Caller! Just brilliant portrayal of Richard Nixon. Anyway, watch Dick, but make sure you figure out what Watergate was first, or else you might end up believing that that's what happened. Okay, film number 15 is District 9 from 2009, I believe. Yes. District 9 is a South African film made and set in South Africa, I believe Johannesburg. And fascinating science fiction film. It's about a race of insectoid aliens who come on a mothership to Earth, and it almost looks like they run out of gas. Their mothership just stops over Johannesburg and is stuck there. But in reality, what's happening is, unlike what we're experiencing today, they're having a real pandemic, and they're all being killed off by some mystery disease. So what do the humans do to help? Because I'll give you a hint. The insectoids look different than we do. Can you guess what we did? We rounded them all up off that ship and we threw them into a ghetto. Isn't that what human beings do? Yes. Obviously, this is a film that is about racism, and specifically in South Africa about apartheid. But racism in general. They're different than us, therefore they must be isolated. You know, when Hitler turned the German people's minds around from thinking, you know, Jews are just like anyone else, they're a huge contributor to how great Germany is, within a few years they were suddenly hated. They're the problem with everything. They're the reason for everything's bad. And all of a sudden it was acceptable to take all the Jews and put them into what they called ghettos. And that's what happened in this film. But the interesting thing is, one of the people who supports that activity actually ends up enforcing that activity, for that matter, ends up becoming infected, and he starts to turn into one of these insectoids. And as he does so, he begins to learn from experience what it's like to be on the other end of racism. Which, by the way, racism is essentially the exact same thing as ostetophobia. The irrational, visceral, gut-wrenching, bile-spitting hatred and fear of homeless people, just because they don't have a place to live. Minnesota is a hotbed of racism and ostetophobia. You may have noticed over the last year, the topic of racism has come up a couple times in Minnesota. Now, I will say, I do not believe it is systemic in the sense that it's being portrayed by, you know, fake groups like Black Lives Matter and all that. It certainly is in certain systems, but that's anywhere, not just Minnesota. But in terms of just the general population, I have never seen the kind of racism I've seen in Minnesota. And of course, their contempt and hatred for homeless people is second to none. But District 9 helps to show you just how unjust and unfair and inhumane racism is. And it does it in a very clever and effective way. If you watch my video entitled A Homeless Man's Challenge to Colin Kaepernick, in there I go over one after another instance of how black people in America have more opportunity than most white people who've ever lived throughout human history ever could have. Literally, they didn't even have the capacity in their mind to imagine that it could exist, to have the opportunities that your average just black person in America has today. And the reason for that is because of real, sincere, and effective civil rights movements back in the 20th century. And starting out, you know, with the Civil War onward. And even before. I mean, there were a lot of people, white people, by the way, who wanted to get rid of slavery way before the Civil War. Many of the founding fathers wanted to get rid of it. So, in that video to Colin Kaepernick, I went over how this country is filled to overflowing. Like a land of milk and honey, it is filled with black lawyers, doctors, engineers, architects, musicians, dancers, celebrities, millionaires, billionaires, presidents, secretaries of state. Apparently, depending on what you think of the Banana Republic's vice president today, vice president. I mean, all of that. And yet I also asked the question, well, would you show me just one homeless practicing doctor, engineer, architect, celebrity, millionaire, billionaire. Would you show me even one? Because you're telling me that black people don't have any opportunity at all. And you're the most oppressed people in the entire world, the history of the world, right? Most oppressed people in America. Meanwhile, 4 million or so homeless Americans are sitting here with nothing, not just something that doesn't resemble opportunity, but they legally are subhuman. We don't have civil rights. We don't have enforceable constitutional rights. We don't have anything. Without that resident address, we can't even fill out the paperwork that the government demands that we fill out, like tax forms and things. If we do, we're committing a felony. We're committing perjury by putting an address on there that isn't ours. You see, that's what homeless means. You don't have one. So, you tell me, who's really oppressed here? Is it black people who have, at least the ones who actually want to try to do something other than sit around smoking pot and complaining all day? They seem to be able to accomplish anything they want to. But I haven't seen one homeless person. I mean, you're going to find one here and there who gets an opportunity, and there you go. That's great. They got the opportunity, you see. But I'm not aware of any homeless person that I've met around here who works harder than I do, and I'm pretty much where I was 5 years ago. I have more expenses now than I did when I had a home, so I can't save money. I've got an employer who exploits me to the extreme. I take home less money now than I did when I started before because of benefits and other skullduggery. So, you tell me. District 9 is a great film. If you're going to have a film that talks about racism or ostetophobia, any kind of irrational, just mindless, degenerate hatred of another group just because they're different, I don't think anyone's done it better, or at least not more uniquely than District 9. I highly recommend watching District 9. Number 16 is Dr. Strangelove, or How I Stopped Worrying and Learned to Love the Bomb. From 1964. Oddly enough, the same year as that great movie I told you about earlier, Beckett, 1964, and A Hard Day's Night. 1964 was a good year for film. Dr. Strangelove, this was Stanley Kubrick's masterpiece. It was originally meant to be a drama, and as they started making it, they realized it was more effective as a really dark comedy. And Peter Sellers plays 3 different roles in it brilliantly. George C. Scott, just an amazing cast, and but much like Beckett did, Dr. Strangelove helps to drill home the point with force that government is nothing more than a bunch of random yahoos. And until people get that through their head, they're going to keep viewing government as if it were something special, as if it was something competent, more competent than the average person out there. I mean, what did George Carlin say once? He said something like, imagine how stupid the average person is in this world. How stupid the average person is. And once you've done that, then realize that half of the people in the world are stupider than them. You see, because it was an average person, you were imagining how stupid they are. You see, that's where government's drawn from, is from those people. Government was not descending from the clouds, from God, with trumpets. Government is a necessary evil, and without checks and balances, it is just plain evil. The United States of America is the only country that has had effective checks and balances. Dr. Strangelove kind of shows you, it goes over a lot of different topics, and it doesn't harp on this at all, I will say. This one is, I almost didn't put it in here because it's not trying to make the point or anything, and the president here does do the best he can under the circumstances, but when you look at it, and you look at how they interact with other world leaders, even though they're being silly with it, the fact is, it really is kind of the way that world leaders interact with each other. They're often like children. Those are governments doing that. Alright, so anyway, I won't go too much detail. one of the best dark comedies ever made, if nothing else. If you haven't seen Dr. Strangelove or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, a Cold War classic, then you must watch Dr. Strangelove. I used to be able to do a decent Strangelove, you know, like, and Mr. President, animals could be bred and slaughtered. I don't know. When I was younger, I could do a better Strangelove. Anyway, number 17 is Duck Soup from 1933. Duck Soup is a Marx Brothers film. And you know, back then they weren't that long, so it's only about an hour long. Typical Marx Brothers slapstick. Very, very funny. Groucho Marx at his best. But very profound if you think about it. Especially if you think about when it was made. 1933. That is basically almost 90 years ago. Almost a century ago. Remember what I said earlier? These films were trying to warn you. That was almost 100 years ago. To give you an example of what I mean, how about this? His character, Rufus T. Firefly, is elected the president of a free country called Freedonia. His character is called Rufus T. Firefly, as I said. He's the president, and the people ask him, well, what are you going to do for this country, Mr. President? And his answer is as follows. And remember, as I say this, in the context of what's going on today. What are you going to do, Mr. President? These are the laws of my administration. No one's allowed to smoke or tell a dirty joke, and whistling is forbidden. You're not allowed to tell a dirty joke. Hail, hail, Freedonia! If chewing gum is chewed, the chewer is pursued, and in the hoosegow hidden, if you choose to chew, you'll be pursued. If any form of pleasure is exhibited, report to me and it will be prohibited. I'll put my foot down, so shall it be. This is the land of the free. The last guy nearly ruined this place, he didn't know what to do with it. If you think this country's bad off now, just wait till I get through with it. That's 100 years ago, folks. Does that sound relevant today? Just watch it. Very funny film, but very sad to think that people should have known to be watching their government more closely. Film number 18 is from 1982. It is called Eating Raoul. And believe it or not, the title is pretty descriptive. This has Paul Bartel and Mary Warrenoff, who were a couple of kind of comedian couple back then. I had such a crush on Mary Warrenoff. Their characters are called the Blands, and that's exactly describes them very well. They are about as bland of a couple, a nice, normal, typical American couple as you can get. Very bland. The film is about how easy it is for people to normalize insanity. Because as these people head off in a direction that most civilized cultures would regard as unbelievably detestable, they see it as perfectly normal. Remember the title of the film, Eating Raoul. Raoul is the name of a man. If that gives you a hint what we're talking about here. How is it possible within a few years for it to become, quote, normal for teachers to tell little girls that they might be little boys, or to tell a little boy that if he goes to the nurse's office, he can get estrogen, but you can't tell your parents, and you can become a little girl? And society calls that normal. And all the way up to the White House, leaders of this nation support that as being remotely sane. Eating Raoul. How do you get to the point of cannibalism without realizing that it's wrong? Remember, Eating Raoul is a comedy. It's a dark comedy. But the fact is, it's about the way that if you don't have some kind of a moral basis, if you don't have some standard for truth, then anything goes. And you can head off in some really, really bad directions.